Good afternoon. The Coalition of the African American Museum Library in Oakland is preserving your life story for history. Why don't we start by having you introduce yourself?
I'm Alice Calvert Fauntleroy Royal.
Can you tell us where you were born and what your age is?
I was born in Allensworth, California, January 15th, 1923.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I do. I have two older brothers. Edward is the oldest, and James is next.
Oh, and they're still living?
My oldest brother is living. My youngest brother deceased December 1st, 03.
Oh, I see. Where did your parents originate?
My father originated in Michigan. My mother originated in Roaring River, North Carolina.
Oh, I see. And your mother's maiden name?
Was Hickerson. My mother's maiden name was Hackett. She comes from the Hickerson family.
Was that a large family?
It's a large family, yes.
Mm-hmm. What were your parents' occupations?
My mother was a governor for a very wealthy family in Alameda for years, and she did the tutoring because the parents were very busy otherwise, and she took them to their dance lessons. She was already fluent in French, so she was able to speak French to all of the hotel people that were in charge as she took the children to their various hotels and to their dance lessons, to their music lessons, and they enjoyed her company as well as they did their parents.
Yeah. What year was this? What years?
That was very early on in Alameda, when she was in her not only late teens and early 20s.
Where did you attend school?
Where did I attend school? I was the second generation Hackett School, Alameda. Early on, where I was born, I had the opportunity of going to school in a historic Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park historic school before it was closed. And that was, my aunt was my teacher, the second and third grade, and she was a straight A student from San Francisco State and could not get a job where she did her practice teaching at Prescott School when she finished college. And so Allensworth School was open, and she became our teacher and my teacher, the second and third grade in the Allensworth School.
This was your mother's sister?
As my mother's sister.
Mm-hmm.
And then I proceeded in 1933 to when we moved up to our family home in Alameda, proceeded on as a second generation at Hackett School, and then high school, Alameda High. Second generation family at Alameda High.
What were some of your earliest memories of childhood?
My earliest memories of where?
Of childhood, growing up.
My first 8 years was in the valley, and it was a rural setting because my family had a small farm in Lemoore, California, and it was probably the best kind of education I could have had, because I learned about the cows and the chickens and the farming and the swimming in the local irrigation districts. And as the youngest person in the family, I had obligations that I had to take care of with my mother. And then my father on the farm had raised produce, and he would take that and I would follow him. And so that was my early education. And when we got into the school classes, books were not necessary so far as learning about rural life. And then my family was well known in the valley, so there was a lot of company. My father's sister and husband were also farmers in a nearby farm. So it became a family. I call my family was sort of like an umbrella. They were our anchors because we were always, no matter what we did, surrounded by family. And so rural life was, and then we had to walk to school. And so walking became one of our habits of getting to school daily. And my mother always knew all of our teachers and connected with all of our teachers in the rural area, in the city area. And so my family was always a part of everything that my brothers and sisters did.
Lemoore is in what valley?
San Joaquin Valley?
San Joaquin Valley.
That is between Fresno and Bakersfield. That's where we were located.
Do you recall an exciting event that occurred during your childhood days? You spoke of the World's Fair earlier. Is that one of your earlier?
My earliest was always connected with family. They were always involved. They were always known. It was church, it was school, it was community activity, it was, and whatever we did, it always was connected with a family situation because the family was known in education, they were known in church, they were known in community. So we were a part of that whole, the family structure, the church, and the community. So whatever we did, there was a close association, both in the San Joaquin Valley as well as in the Bay Area.
When you were growing up, what sort of influences directed your advanced education?
Education was a priority in my family. There was no such thing as if and were. You just automatically prepared. If you weren't getting it at home, you got it at school, and you got it at both areas. And the other thing that was extremely interesting, again, your family was not only educated oriented. My father was a college man in Michigan, and all of our family members were educationally oriented. So you just automatically, you move from elementary to high school to college, and in preparation for whatever you had in mind that you wanted to do, and mine was nursing. And I had a nurse in the family, my mother's sister, who was my idol. And so, therefore, she gave me a lot of cues of what to do and what not to do. And then we had the wonderful civic-minded members, either members of your church, members of the community, or members of family friends. And we had many of the pioneer families that encouraged us in all those areas. Because we went to, after Allensworth, the schools, you usually were the only one in the class. You see, and your family followed you through each step. You know, if there's someone that had some racism, your family was right there to correct in a very diplomatic way. And so these are the people that undergirded me my entire life. And I have to keep on saying my family was my umbrella, and they were my anchor.
What was your aunt's name? Who was the nurse that influenced you?
Mrs. Myrtle Hackett Tibbs. And she was not able to take her nurse's training early on in California. And so she went to Montgomery, Alabama to do her nurse's training. And then she returned because my cousin set up the first black hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. And when she returned from nurse's training, she became the superintendent of nurses there at the Booker T. Washington Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. And I was always there on summers and watching her go through her nursing. And my cousin was the owner and the doctor in the hospital. And so, again, my family was so much involved with everything that transpired in my life.
Where did you go to nursing school?
Highland School of Nursing. And this was my class. As you see, there were only 3 of us represented in this class. We were the first 3 persons to live in that Nightingale nursing home during the entire history up to that point of Highland School of Nurses. There were others that came before us, but they had to go home. When their classes were over, their duty was over during nursing training, they had to go home, no matter what hour it was. But the beautiful part, even before we got into training, was our wonderful civic-minded people that helped us to get in there. We were prepared, but we had to have the background. Ruth's mother, Miss Beckford, among the early ones, Mrs. Allbrier, among the early ones that helped to fight to get us in there. Mrs. Dixon, Billy Dixon's mother, helped to fight to get and all of those who were involved with the NAACP and our fraternities and sororities, all of them had leadership at that point. Helped to move the major people that were in charge of hospitals to get in to Highland School of Nursing and to be able to live there for 3 years during our training.
What years did this cover?
Covers, for my training period, 1943 to 1946, and we were the first cadet nurses to go through that class. And the cadet nurses were set up, the program was federally set up to help to guarantee that there would be some nursing, sufficient nursing services during World War II. And so we came along at that war period, and we had a fascinating opportunity because our director was the chairperson for nursing registration for all of California. The director, Dr. Black, was the chairperson of almost everything medically oriented in the county. So we had a very strict training period. And it was a must that we come out to pass our registration board. And so we had a wonderful opportunity, even though we were the first to live in the nursing home, that we had all of the civic people behind us to know that we were going to get through there safely without a whole lot of racism.
And then you went on to university.
Yes, I worked 2 years as head nurse on isolation at Highland Hospital when I graduated. Then I went to NYU, and that was my first opportunity out of California to live. But I also lived in a very historic area, and that was in the main Y that had been founded and run by outstanding black leadership. Dr. Dorothy Height was one of them, and some of the early women that established the colored women's clubs were a part of that the Harlem Y. And right across the street was Mother Zion, the founding church, the Amy Zion Church. So I would look out my window at the Y where I was able to stay and see all of the activity of Mother Zion and attend there every Sunday under Paul Robeson's brother. And that was a beautiful opportunity. And then right around the corner was Adam Clayton Powell's church. So I went there at 8 o'clock in the morning and saw him parade up and down the aisles. And that was another experience. Every Sunday, 8 o'clock at his church, and he kept people aware, very aware of everything moving in the national capital, as well as all of the kinds of things that they were doing in New York City at that time. It was really an opportunity of seeing some of the early civil rights marches between those two churches and the surrounding churches in the area. Fantastic. The other thing that was very outstanding of that period, I was to meet all of the outstanding nursing leaders, black nursing leaders in the United States that had helped to push the integration process of the black nurse into every mainstream. The Red Cross, which first was very important because they were the ones that everybody had to go through in order to become a part of the military. And that was a hard breakthrough. But we met the leaders, the black leaders that were involved in that. Dr. Mabel K. Stoppers, Mrs. Stell Massey Osborne, and Mrs. Stell Massey Osborne was the first black nurse to get a master's from Columbia and became the first professor of nursing education at NYU. And NYU is where I was going to get my public health. And so again, we met with those people, and interestingly enough, those same two people, Dr. Mabel K. Stoppers and Mr. Stell Massey Osborne, we were able to nominate and get them into the American Nurses Hall of Fame because of what they meant to us as black nurses.
And you got your...
I got my Bachelor of Science in public health nursing at New York University.
Okay. Can you tell us, just sort of in brief summary, although I know you have a great affection and a great deal to say about Allensworth, but I'd like to hear a little something about Allensworth from you.
How you want to deal with Allensworth? All right, well, first of all, I was born there. And in my grandparents' home. And as I said, my second and third grade under my aunt. And that was a rural setting. And it was not until many years later that I was to learn that it was so historic because it was a town founded in 1908. And I have to emphasize the fact that in relationship to California history, when California was founded, 1850, and Allensworth founded in 1908, California was just 58 years old as a state. Founded by blacks, built by blacks, run by blacks. Blacks educated their own. They had a voting district and outstanding education. The head of the educational system of California visited that school and gave it an A rating. And that was in 1917. And so this, I call them VIA people, the pioneers, people with vision and the intellect and the ability to carry out their dream. And the dream was what you see now that we are restoring as a historic town in California, the only town in California honoring black pioneers.
And isn't Allensworth particularly significant in your genealogy? Your ancestor was a primary founding father. Can you tell us a little about him?
Well, my grandfather first located in San Francisco in 1886. My mother was the baby of the family. And he was always a church member. So he was a member of First Church, San Francisco, AME Zion Church. He established a business on California Street, a rubber good business on California Street.
What his name was? His name?
A rubber,
His name
Mr.
was?
James Alexander Hackett. And he was there for any number of years until he built the first home in Alameda and completed it in 1890. And he further, after he finished that, established another business in Alameda, which was the first drayage business. And drayage business is the old name for moving business. And so he had that and brought his boys up under that business as well.
And he was associated with the founding of Allensworth?
He was early on, and in building his own home, along with his brother and another friend who was also a member of the AME Zion Church, built the home in Allensworth also. And the school started in my grandparents' home in Allensworth for the Allensworth community before the school was built in 1912. And so it just gives you something of the industry of black people, pioneers of early California. Yeah. They wanted to have their own building, their own land, their own structure, and be able to run it themselves in relationship to other pioneers that were doing likewise.
What is your marital status?
What is my marital status? I'm a widow at twice. I married, my first husband was Reverend Fauntleroy, who was the minister of this church. And he became a widow while I was at New York University. And my mother was very fond of him, and she was right here. She was right here. And so when I came home from New York University, finished in 1950, and retained a job as among the early public health nurses at Oakland Health Department, which was downtown Oakland. And so I was there until working, until we married in August of 1950, and remained married until he passed in an automobile accident in 58. I remained a widow for a year and remarried Cornelius Royal. Mm-hmm.
Do you have children?
I have one son by my first marriage, and he is a graduate of UC Santa Cruz, and he's in a counseling organization in Florida. Mm-hmm.
What was it like working as a nurse here in Oakland in the early 40s?
Well, first was wonderful to have the opportunity of working at least almost 2 years after I graduated at Highland Hospital, and working with the people that I trained with, and it was beautiful. And that helped me earn my money for New York University. And then after taking my training and graduating from New York University, we were prepared and among the early ones to work as public health nurses in Oakland Health Department. And that, again, we were fortunate because the director was the national president in the national body of American public health. Again, it's the magnificence of the leadership that we had as we came up in our struggle. And I say struggle because we had to be more prepared than those that already had been hired. And then we also had the opportunity of working with the first black supervisor in public health in California.
Who was that?
And that was Mary Royal. And she was married to my husband, and we saw her through her last days in care, because she was also the first black graduate of UC San Francisco, and went on to did her master's at Columbia and came back and became the first black supervisor in public health in the state of California. And she was one of our supervisors in the Oakland Health Department. Again, she passed the same year as my first husband.
So she mentored you?
Yes, and she was my mentor. Fantastic mentor, outstanding in public health, as well as a fantastic human being. Yeah.
Let's digress just a bit. When you were growing up in the Bay Area here, what were some of the political and sort of cultural things afoot in the Bay? We spoke briefly off camera about the World's Fair, and you mentioned how all of the people in leadership positions in the African American community were involved in that. Can you give me a little bit more on that?
Well, there were the organizations such as the Colored Women's Clubs, and they were very active and in church, and the church where the young people were, and they really kind of kept a tight watch on our progress. When are you graduating? We want you to work for the scholarships, you know. We want you to be a part of the NAACP groups. We want you to be a part of the links were growing up, the sororities were growing, the church activities were very close because Cooper, AME Zion, Beth Eden, 15th Street, and we knew all of the young people because we had gathered, and we even had the group that we kind of grew up with, the teenagers of the 30s, and Ruth's brother was a part of that group, and many others within the community were part of that group, and all of the social structures continued to operate together for almost all of the social functions. And then we had the home parties, And the same people were at our home parties. The same people were in the activities within the community.
The World's Fair, I believe, was in 1939. Was that correct? About 1930? I mean,
The World Fair?
the World's Fair.
The World's Fair, yes. Yes, it was. It's over on what was Gould Island. And again, it was fascinating because all of our outstanding musicians were involved and were always invited to these big fairs, and certainly that was, schools were let out on special days to go across that bridge that had just been completed.
The Bay Bridge.
The Bay Bridge, and over onto the island. And it was truly, truly historic.
Memorable event.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are running out of time now, and is there anything else you'd like to speak about?
So far as?
Is your life that you'd like to have encapsulated in this summary?
All right. I think that one of the things that has been, as I look back on it, has been the people that I grew up with have meant so much in my life. And it has been a sort of a continuity from childhood, adulthood, married life, family life, that has meant so much. And the church has been a part of it, the community has been a part of it, education has always been a part of it. And these links have moved us from one state to another in leadership and meeting people in the wider circles where we've been able to meet with people that were on state level, national level, international level, and on all levels academically.
I appreciate your comments. The Coalition is so proud to honor you as one of our historians in the program Eternal Voices on today, Friday, March 26, 2004. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Royal, I see that you have some interesting photographs and a certificate of achievement. Would you please tell us a little bit about them?
I would be delighted to. This was the home that my grandfather built and finished in 1890 and raised his own family, and I had the opportunity of living in this home from 9 years old until I married in 1950. And this is a picture of my grandmother and myself sitting on her lap on a family home in Alameda. And I loved her dearly, and I think that's probably one of the reasons I worked so hard, Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park, because it was there that I began to know who Grandma was and the greatness and the love that she had, not only for us as children, but each of her children. A picture of myself graduating after 3 years, 1943 to 46, one of the three, the first to live in the nursing home, Highland Hospital, and this was our class representing the three of us among all of the other white students at Nightingale Hall. And Mrs. Nadine Bird's sister was a member. She was my roommate. And Nadine was our first black supervising nurse at Highland and went on to become the first supervising black at Kaiser, and also the first black associate professor of nursing and biological sciences at College of Holy Names, and the first associate black professor at Contra Costa College in biological sciences. These are the kind of people that have been a part. And she was also a Sunday school teacher right here early on in Cooper. And Mrs. Bird was a member of the choir.
Oh, my goodness.
Mm-hmm. And my picture graduating from New York University, and a very wonderful opportunity of sharing with our national leaders that helped to integrate almost everything that was integrated in the health services, as well as the Red Cross.
And you graduated in 1950? What year did you graduate, New York University?
New York University, 1950, yeah, January 1950. And with the lower picture was taken in Africa because I had been selected as the first nurse for the California Teachers Association prime tour to Africa, which was 6 weeks. And they had 30 applicants for the job. And so I became the only black on the administrative staff for that tour. It was first stop represented in Sierra Leone in the mayor's office. And that was 2 weeks, and we spent 2 weeks at the university there, and 2 weeks following in Ghana at Science and Technology. We stayed and met with all. It was my first opportunity to get out into the villages, and I had the opportunity of having a private conference with the Ashantahene. That stopped. And then we went on to Lagos, Nigeria, and that was another stop at the university and more educational opportunity. And it's the first time we had the opportunity of seeing the professors not only in the classroom, giving their academic approach to Africa and its history, but those same professors would take us out into their own tribal land, introduce us to their tribal chief, obeisance to the tribal chief, and take us through the whole village, explaining what that village did in the way of design, artwork, stonework, diamond work, and it was the first time that I'd ever had anyone ask to do where was the best place to come in the United States to get a PhD in one language. And after 6 weeks, all of the white people, and there were a few white, I think there were only about 3 black teachers on that trip, and they were amazed at the academic prowess of the Africans and the progress and what they did with the crudity of the tools. And they were just buying and buying and buying. But also on that trip, I had the opportunity of not only meeting the Ashantahene, but the professional people and see how they lived. The nurse at Science and Technology was married to a lawyer, and we had entry into her home. And so this is the kind of wonderful experience that we had to see other people realize that Africa was not a dark continent.
Yes. Ashantahene, can you define that for us briefly?
That is the chief over the Ghanaian people. And we arrived in Ghana at the same time he was being initiated as the chief. And it was all of the celebrations with all of the royalty of Ghana right there in that area of Science and Technology that came from all over with all of the routine, with all of the umbrellas and all of the fans and all of the regalness of the African people for this installment of the Shantahini.
Opportunity to be able to participate in.
Yes.
Tell me about the proclamation from the office of the mayor.
That was given to me because I was responsible for a very large scholarship to Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And at the annual presentation, someone was kind enough to honor me. The mayor was kind enough to honor me with that proclamation as Allensworth Day in Oakland.
How wonderful. Well, Mrs. Royal, thank you so much. And again, the coalition is greatly honored to have you participate in this project.
Well, I am grateful to be a part of the coalition.